Hello, I invite you to join me today on the first of a series of videos that are primarily designed for folks that have recently joined the hobby or have decided they'd like to try to repair one of their American Flyer S-gauge engines. We are going to focus today on one particular style or wheel arrangement of engine commonly referred to as an Atlantic. The Atlantic has 4 small wheels up front, 4 driving wheels that are larger, and then 2 trailing wheels. Behind me, you will see an example of this. This particular wheel arrangement was introduced by A.C. Gilbert when they first brought out this new S-gauge line in 1946. There are approximately 18 variations of this particular wheel arrangement, and so they are very common in the world of American Flyer S-gauge. And it's very likely that you have one of these in your fleet. And congratulations. They are known by a couple distinctions. Number 1, they are really good runners. Number 2, they do a nice job of pulling trains. And number 3, they seem to manage track that's maybe not the greatest, as well as going through switches with ease. The intention of this video is to help those of you who are either beginners or new to the hobby maintain your engines. Gilbert made some incredibly amazing toy trains. That's why there's so many of them still around today. And with a little bit of periodic TLC and maintenance, they will continue to run for a very long time. Today begins the first of several episodes. I invite you to join me as we enter into this world of repair and maintenance. It's a fun part of the hobby, and it's something that a lot of us can do. So without further delay, let's go. All right, today what I want to do is do a service of a American Flyer Atlantic, part of their 300 series. This is a series that existed for many years, and as such there are a couple different variations to the 300. The one I'm looking at today is the first variation, and it included just a little bit more ornate valve gear. And so we're gonna go ahead and crack this one open and kind of go through it, clean it, and get it running as well as possible. And I'm hoping that going through this one will be helpful to many others that are out there wanting to work on their own 300s. And at a future date, I've got a more modern version of the 300 that we'll take a look at. So kind of the first thing I like to do is just see if an engine will work. And it kind of gives me a baseline, if you will. And when something's been sitting for a long time, there are a number of places that there might be issues with broken wires or poor connectivity that can prevent an engine from operating. So it's a bit of a risk, but I'm going to go ahead and give it a whirl and see what happens here. Well, that's encouraging. Hear the reversing unit trying to move. Hey, all right. Wonderful. Okay, so no big surprise. The reversing unit is not working. Well, that's not entirely true. I heard it moving, but now that it's operating, I'm not getting it to advance. So that's why we're only getting engine to operate in one direction. But that's a good sign that we've got connectivity from the tender pickup all the way through to the engine. And so yeah, a little bit about this 300. This particular version, because it has these brass buttons on the bottom, this is one of the very first engines that that Flyer made. So this would have been from 1946. And you can tell that because of the brass buttons. They had some other wheel arrangements. The I believe the Northern and the Hudson would be two examples of that. That I understand there are a few around with the brass buttons on there. And these brass buttons served a purpose. They actually used a type of activation section that set between the rails, and apparently those are really rare. So if you have one, good for you. Apparently, the little I know about them is they're not an easy thing to find. With these, also the shell is die cast and the tender is metal. Another thing that separates these early versions from others is there's this depression here in the side. That was something that was unique to some of the earliest versions. And there's not much inside this tender other than a weight. The reverse unit, as you can see by the fact that the locking lever is here on top, that means the reversing unit is up here. These early engines, at least this particular one, did not have a smoke in it. And I'm not sure if it has a headlight either. We'll find that out. Another thing that's interesting about these is they're called 4-part shells. And the reason for that is this front assembly actually comes apart in a couple pieces. And I understand there's also an extra weight in the front of these that wasn't found on later models. So just little bits of interest that I thought I might pass on. But now that I've blathered on a little bit, it's time to start with the disassembly. There's not necessarily a wrong or right way to get started when you're taking one of these Atlantics apart, because they're, like I said, they're pretty simple. But what I tend to do is start at the front and then work my way back. We'll start here. We'll take this first screw out, and this should release the front section of the cow catcher and also the front truck. Like that. Then next we have a screw that holds, I've oftentimes heard people refer to this as a steam chest. It's a casting that has the pistons or cylinders in it. And again, if you have a later 300, then this section would be all integrated into the shell, so that would not be a separate. But you can see I'm lifting up a little bit and I'm pulling forward, and that slides the valve gear off from the side. And there's a little washer here, so I'm going to go ahead and tilt that off. And I want to put this back together here. I'll leave that off the side. Next are 2 screws, and this is common for the later models as well. And these 2 screws help to hold the frame. The frame would obviously have side rods and whatnot on it. And so I'm going to go ahead and undo these next. One thing that I probably should mention too is I'm using a very small screwdriver. If you find that there's any resistance to these screws coming loose, you want to be careful with a small screwdriver and maybe go to one that's more this size. This will keep from damaging the slot head, cheese head, I don't know. I've heard them called different types of names, but these screws, because if you start to strip those out, then obviously it's going to lead to problems later on. These early Atlantics were a little unusual in that the drawbar did not go all the way to the tender. And so they had a bar across the back here, and the tender had a special shaped device that you would screw to connect that to the engine, and the truck just kind of hung back here and had a special hook to keep it in place. That was something that they changed when they went to finding ways, I think, to probably decrease their their price of machines and cost of their engines. The next thing I'm doing is I'm going back here to what's called the jack panel. The jack panel is where the early engines had a place for the wires to actually slide into holes, and that transferred the power. And on this particular version, you'll see there are these two wires with these metal tips on them. And this is something that I oftentimes will clean because they just get oxidizing over time, and oxidation is an insulator, so it inhibits some of the current flow that we want. We want to have as good a current as possible. Okay, so we have this jack panel released, and what I'll do is I'll actually turn it sideways and just kind of tuck it in here, because in a little bit you'll see why that's important. All right, the next thing I want to do is I want to remove this bolt here. I should say this nut here. Now I'm using a 1/4 inch socket driver to do that. Now the reason I want to do that is because I want to get this whole assembly loose, and the other option would be to take this screw loose, so either would be an option. I'm just choosing to go this way. I'm also going to go ahead and reattach this screw again, so I don't lose track of it. Repeat on the same side, or the opposite side here. Okay, now that we've got the valve gear disassembled or unattached from the drive wheels, we've got the jack panel loose. Now, the next thing we want to do is we want to push our frame, pull our frame forward just a little bit, and I'll show you why that is in just a little bit here too. And go ahead and gently lift out. Okay, so there is a light bulb in there. And we'll take a moment to inspect. Here is the weight that I mentioned earlier. And again, this is unique to these very early Atlantics, that they had that weight, and that is something that the light bulb just sits in. And then also with these 4-piece, the boiler front will come off. So I'm going to go ahead and leave these off for now. But as you can see, now we've got the shell separated, and mechanically it's pretty simple. And the reason we slid our frame forward is because right here, these notch sections fit into this part of the frame. And Flyer did that as a way to keep this frame kind of locked in, so there were screws that attached here, and then it was locked into the boiler shell here, and that provided a pretty rigid connection. Now, one of the things that I want to do, or like to do, when I have the shells off, is just kind of take an inspection and look inside. The later ones oftentimes had a stamp here. You could see when they were made, so that's always fascinating. And I see that there's a little bit of rust on this one, so I'm gonna take that loose, and I'm gonna polish it up real good before I put it back together. This one looks perfect, but for some reason this railing is a little bit rusty. There's a little bit of rust back here. That one's got a little bit, so I'll polish those up. And then also the valve gear. Now that I'm able to see the back side, there's some rust. So I'm going to go ahead and take this loose, just so I can clean that up real good. And again, this is something that's unique to these early ones, is that you'd actually have some extra linkages here. I'm going to return the screw back here so it doesn't wander away. It's not a bad idea if you're doing a flyer repair to actually take a picture of each side of the engine before you start to disassemble it. The reason for that is it helps to know how to put things back together, and this is really important if you haven't done many of these, because it's possible to get confused, especially if you're doing a more complicated valve gear like maybe on a Hudson or something like that, where the linkages sometimes don't seem like they're logically going in the right places. So thank you for joining me today. I hope you found this video helpful. Please remember there will be some additional videos following this that will be in sequential order, and they're intentionally designed that after you finish one you go to the next to get your next set of instructions. Hopefully you will find this helpful as you endeavor to keep your fleet in operation. Until next time, enjoy your trains, enjoy your flyer, take care, God bless, we'll see you. Bye-bye.